How many decisions do you make in a day? How important are those decisions? While you may not think most of those decisions are life-changing, they are. Not just to yourself, but everyone around you. Just driving to work could change someone's life forever. An accident caused by choosing to turn left because you're late for work. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between personal gain and what's right for someone else? How did you decide? What does true leadership look like when someone you care about is in trouble, even if they made questionable choices? Decisions have enduring consequences. I was a truck driver and I owned my own trucking business for many, many years. I hauled local in my early years, over the road long haul, oversized for 10 years, and even refrigerated. I hauled huge windmill towers for quite a while. Decision making was much more important than driving skills. I had to anticipate every possible thing that could go wrong constantly. Will I be able to make this turn? If I make this turn and I can't make it, will I be able to get out of it? The bridge says it's 16 foot high, but the road looks like it's been paved recently. Is it still high enough for me? My truck can only go 10 miles an hour up the mountain. Will another truck that's not paying attention hit me from behind? I have to follow a permitted route. Is my next turn coming up? Will I bottom out over the railroad track? You get the picture. The decisions I made could easily put myself in a dangerous situation. Not only myself, but my pilot cars, the company I was working for, the company I contracted to, the crane crews, the windmill tower owners. I had to weigh schedules to pick up and schedules to deliver against safety to myself and the general public. You would probably never believe the amount of times I asked God for help and guidance. After asking, I just know, don't do it. Sure, I got flack from it, but then the next guy would try it and he'd bottom out or get stuck in an intersection or hit a sign. The point I'm trying to make is decisions have consequences, not only for yourself, but for people you might not even know. So let's look back at the first few chapters we've already covered and how each story was predominantly about decisions. God decided to not only to make our world, but us in his image. Adam and Eve chose to eat the forbidden fruit over God's command. Eve chose to believe the serpent and misinformation. Cain didn't bring his best to the Lord and then chose to murder his brother out of envy and jealous. Noah chose to trust God even when he was probably ridiculed for over 100 years. The people's decision to build a tower. Abram's decision to respond to God's call. Do you think any of these people understood how their decision would affect our lives today? We're not passive. Our choices matter. Actions lead to outcomes for good or bad. We're accountable for what we choose. The curious thing is most of our decisions are made unconsciously. Our subconscious reacts without even consulting our conscious brain. Without even thinking, we go about our day letting our subconscious brain make decisions for us. We say things that hurt other people because we didn't actually think before we spoke. We grab a piece of cake and eat it. How many times have you driven somewhere and wondered, how did I get here? Did I stop at the light? Did I stop at the stop sign? Our lives are dependent on our decisions. Remember to engage your brain before you act. Today's discussion also involves decision making, particularly Lot's. We will focus on Abraham and his nephew Lot as they return from Egypt. They become prosperous and eventually separate due to disputes between their herdsmen. Lot chooses the fertile Jordan plain near Sodom, while Abram stays in Canaan. Chapters 13 and 14 show the consequences of Lot's choice. He's caught in a regional war and taken captive. This prompts Abram to rescue him. It also introduces Melchizedek, the king priest, and shows Abram's continued faith and integrity. So what can we learn from this chapter? The importance of peace and avoiding strife. When Abram noticed the quarrel between his herdsmen and Lot's, he immediately sought a peaceful solution. Let there be no strife between you and me, for we're brethren. Maintaining peace and unity, especially among family, is more important than material gain. Selflessness and generosity. Abram, though the elder and rightful leader, gave Lot the first choice of land. If you take the left, then I'll go to the right. If you take the right, then I will go to the left. True leadership often involves humility, generosity, and putting others before oneself. The dangers of selfish choices. Lot chose the most fertile land, the plain of Jordan, prioritizing material wealth without considering the moral dangers of living near Sodom. Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. Choices based solely on material benefits can lead to spiritual and moral peril. Trusting in God's promises. After Lot departed, God reaffirmed his promise to Abram, assuring him of future blessings. Lift your eyes now and look, all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. God's promises remain sure, even when circumstances change. Faith and obedience are rewarded. The value of worship and gratitude. Abram built altars and called upon the name of the Lord wherever he went, showing his ongoing relationship with God through worship and gratitude. Consistent worship and thankfulness keep us aligned with God's will. Genesis 13 teaches about the importance of peace, humility, wise decision-making, trusting God's promises, and maintaining a worshipful attitude. These lessons are timeless and applicable to many areas of life, including relationships, leadership, and faith. Lot's decision in chapter 13 leads directly to his predicament in chapter 14. The chapters together underscore the outcomes of choices made by sight versus faith and reveal Abram's character and action. Now to the reading. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was going with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while living together. For their possessions were so abundant that they were not able to live together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were living then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if to the right, then I will go to the left. Then Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were evil and sinners, exceedingly so, against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated for him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your seed can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and came and lived by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Abram lets Lot choose where he wants to live. Lot looks around and sees that the land near Sodom is very green and good for farming and raising animals. So he chooses to live near Sodom because it looks like the best land. But Sodom is the city known for its wickedness and bad behavior. By moving near Sodom, Lot puts himself and his family close to danger and bad influences. Later, because of where he lives, Lot gets caught up in a war between kings and is taken captive. Abram has to rescue him. Lot chose to live near a place that looked nice, but was full of evil people. This decision led to trouble for him and his family. It teaches us that sometimes choosing what looks best on the outside can lead to problems if we don't think about the dangers or the kind of people we will be around. Genesis 14 tells how Lot is captured during a war between kings and how Abram rescues him. Here are some important lessons we can learn from this chapter. Courage and initiative. Abram doesn't ignore Lot's trouble. Even though Lot made a risky choice to live near Sodom, Abram bravely gathers a small group of men to rescue his nephew. This teaches us to help others in need, even when it's difficult. Selflessness and generosity. Abram risks his own safety for Lot. When he wins the battle, he refuses to keep the spoils of war for himself, showing he is not greedy. He gives credit to God for his victory and only accepts what's fair. Dependence on God. Abram does not rely only on his own strength. He believes that God is with him and gives him success. Later, he refuses a reward from the king of Sodom, saying he wants God alone to get the credit for making him rich. Choosing good friends and influences. The story reminds us that Lot's problem started because he chose to live near Sodom, a place known for evil. Our choices are about where we live, and who we spend time with can deeply affect our lives. Integrity and humility. Abram acts with honesty and humility. When offered rewards, he refuses to be indebted to the king of Sodom. He wants to keep his reputation clean and show that he trusts God for his needs. Genesis 14 teaches us to help others in trouble, to be brave, and to trust God more than our own strengths, to avoid bad influences, and to act honestly and generously. And it happened in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Baalah. All these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is, the Salt Sea. Now for 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. So in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim and the Horites in their Mount Seir as far as El-Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En-Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they struck all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites, who were living in Hazazon Tamar. and the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zebulun, and the king of Bala, that is Zoar, came out, and they arranged themselves for battle against them in the valley of Siddim. Against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elazar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. But those who remained behind fled to the hill country. Then they took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their food supply, and departed. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions, and departed. Now he was living in Sodom. Then a refugee came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was dwelling by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Anar, and these were in the covenant with Abram. So Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, and he led out his trained men born in his house, 318 in number, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his men against them by night, he and his servants, and struck them, and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. And he brought back all the possessions, and he brought back his relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the people. Then after he came back from striking down Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. Then he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Then he gave him 1/10 of all. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give the people to me, but take your possessions for yourself. Then Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, so that you would not say, I have not made Abram rich. I will take nothing except what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their share. The Bible often contrasts 2 approaches to life, living by faith and living by sight. These 2 ways of living shape our choices, our attitudes, and the outcomes of our lives. Living by sight means making decisions based on primarily what you can see, touch, or understand with our senses. It relies on logic, appearances, and immediate benefits. People who live by sight are guided by what seems best in the moment, often focusing on comfort, security, and material gain. In Genesis 13, Lot is a good example of someone living by sight. When Abram gives him the choice of land, Lot chooses the area near Sodom because it looks fertile and promising. He doesn't consider the moral dangers or the character of the people living there. Instead, he chooses what looks best for his livestock and wealth. Lot's decision, based only on what he could see, leads to trouble and danger for himself and his family. Living by sight is not always wrong. God gave us senses and reason, but when we rely only on appearances or our own understanding, we miss the deeper dangers or greater blessings. We may make choices that seem wise in the short term, but carry hidden risks or lead us away from what is truly good. Living by faith, in contrast, means trusting God and His guidance, even when we cannot see the full picture or understand how things will turn out. It involves believing that God's promises are true and that He knows what is best for us, even when circumstances are uncertain or difficult. Abram represents living by faith. When God calls him to leave his homeland and go to an unknown place, Abram obeys, trusting God's promise to bless him. Later, when Abram allows Lot to choose first, he trusts that God will take care of him, regardless of what land is left. Abram doesn't insist on the best looking land. He believes that God's blessing is more important than appearances. Living by faith often means making choices that don't make sense by the world's standards. It may involve sacrifice or risk, but is grounded in the belief that God is good, wise, and able to provide, even when we cannot see how. As Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. In practical terms, living by faith means seeking God's guidance in prayer, reading His Word, and being willing to obey, even if it's hard. It means valuing integrity, love, and spiritual growth over immediate success or comfort. Living by sight, on the other hand, leads us to trust only our own judgment and what seems obvious. Living by sight is guided by appearances and self-reliance, while living by faith is guided by trust in God's promises and His wisdom, even when we cannot see the outcome. The Bible encourages us to walk by faith, not by sight, trusting that God sees beyond what we can see and will lead us in the best way. So if we make thousands of decisions every day, how do we know if we are living by faith or by sight? Before you make an impactful decision, here are a few questions you could ask yourself. When I make important decisions, do I pray and seek God's guidance, or do I rely only on what seems logical or beneficial to me? Do I value spiritual growth and obedience to God, even when it doesn't lead to immediate success or comfort? Am I willing to trust God's promises, even when circumstances look uncertain or difficult? Do I let fear of the unknown or lack of control stop me from following where God might be leading me? When facing challenges, do I turn first to God for help, or do I depend on my own resources and understanding? Do I choose relationships, jobs, or opportunities based on outward appearance and gain, or do I consider God's values and guidance? How do I respond when God's ways don't make sense to me? Do I obey anyway or resist? Am I more concerned with what others think of my choices or with being faithful to God? Do I hold on to God's truth and promises even when I can't see how things will work out? Can I recall times when I took a step of faith, even though the outcome was unclear, and saw God's faithfulness? These are examples of a few questions you could ask yourself. More importantly, you need to find the question which works for you. For myself, mine's more a visual than an actual question. When my children were young, I attended a church that often had the youth perform skits during service. They were great visuals of what Brother Randy was covering that day. Anyway, a group of young men came walking down the aisle, one behind the other. But one of the young men had behind him a guy dressed like Jesus, dragging a cross on his shoulder. When they got to the front, the other guy started talking and encouraging him, the one that had Jesus with him, to do something he knew he shouldn't. I don't remember the conversation or what they were trying to get him to do, but it was clear that he was uncomfortable because he had Jesus with him. And while the other guys didn't know it, the young man clearly knew Jesus heard every word they were saying. This visual stays with me today. Often when I'm considering what decision I should make, I think on this. If Jesus was standing behind me, what would I do? How much more powerful does it feel if you know that you're being observed? Someone's watching you. Are you the only one in the crowd with Jesus behind you? Or do you leave Jesus in a book on the bookshelf? Important questions. I'm Merrill, and this is Battlegram. Please subscribe, like, share if you received any value from this today. See you in the next episode.